Michael, as he prefers to be talked to as, directed as, referred to as. You were a cop in Baltimore, and you put a string of tweets that I read that was on Huffington Post.
Point 1. Huffington Post. For Joe Rogan to say that he first saw Michael Wood Jr.'s tweets about police brutality while surfing Huffington Post didn't surprise me in the least. Huffington Post has been, and still is, a very progressive, I put the term in quotations because progressive liberalism is anything but progressive, and left-leaning news site. Have you seen the Twitter picture of Huffington Post's editors meeting? It's entirely all female and apparently all white. Just as I wouldn't assume anything an all-male and all-black editor board of a newspaper puts out as fact with no bias, the same goes for this rag. For HuffPo to feature Mr. Wood's tweets, regardless of the content of the tweets, would lead me immediately to start looking for the other side of the story. As it turns out, the other side of the story is simply watching Mr. Wood explain and elaborate on his ideas and experiences for 2.5 hours. Tweets and short blog posts are this man's friend. To be exposed to his thought processes for longer than 10 minutes is to invite severe criticism, this entire series of videos being proof of that.
And that's when I got interested in this whole story, because it's very rare that someone who's a cop comes out and tells about all the shit that they experience. I have friends that are cops, and I know there's a lot of good cops out there.
Point 2. A lot of good cops. This is a phrase that seems innocent in and of itself. On the surface, saying that there are a lot of good cops out there is an affirmation that despite the attention given to cops doing illegal things, the majority of cops are doing the right thing. In actuality, this phrase is usually followed by an example of cops violating civil rights. Much like institutionalized racism is a way to call all white people racist without risking a fight. Saying there are a lot of good cops out there, then following that with examples of illegal activity is a way to categorically condemn law enforcement officers as evil without risking any negative action to your face. I have come to loathe this phrase, and have to hold my tongue when around well-meaning people that are just repeating what they have heard from their sociology or African studies professor. Disclaimer. Now that my rant about a purely personal matter is over, I feel that I should clarify things. Just because I rail against an ex-cop that universally condemns cops doesn't mean that I am in universal support of cops. Instead of painting with a broad brush, when I find something to criticize, I look for the specific moment and subject to do so. And when I find something to support, I make sure I am supporting something that I wholeheartedly agree with, which put me at odds with Michael Wood Jr. from jump. If you do a crap job, I can't stand you. If you use a position of authority to bully people, I despise you. And if you demonize an entire group of people for twisting and cherry-picking a complex issue to forward a personal agenda, I have nothing but pity in my heart for you.
Just like there's good everything. Sam Harris and Dan Carlin just did a podcast recently together. It's a really excellent podcast. And one of the things they were talking about people in power, people that are politicians, that there's the whole spectrum. You get great people that are genuinely trying to do good, and you also get psychopaths. It seems like you ran into a lot of fucking psychopaths. How long were you a cop for?
I was a cop for 11 years. But
you look like you're 20.
Thanks.
How's that possible?
I don't know. Good genetics.
Point 3. Handsome bastard. I can't find a date of birth for Michael Wood Jr. online. Maybe I didn't look hard enough. So let's make some assumptions. If he got into the United States Marine Corps at 18 and served 5 years, then served 11 years with the Baltimore Police Department and got out in 2014, that would make him 36 years old in 2016. Now, how many 36-year-old guys that are both cop and Marine look this young? I do have to admit I'm a bit jealous of his apparent youth. since I look more like a balding and underweight Shar-Pei with a glandular condition. But my main point is, what are the chances that a white, handsome, ex-cop, educated Marine would take up the mantle of social activism? Maybe I just don't handle jealousy that well, but this seems a little convenient to me. Or I'm just bitter.
Good genetics, and I guess the stress didn't fuck with you.
It didn't really.
Really?
To be honest.
How did it not?
My idea of what an officer should be was to be more RoboCop-ish, like where I took my emotions out of the job and handled it strictly as enforcing the law. So if I was spit on, I realized they weren't spitting at me. They were spitting at the uniform. It was just irrelevant. I understood it wasn't personal. So I separated that as like a role, maybe, like I was acting.
That's a great attitude to have, I guess.
Point 4. Being a RoboCop. This is a sentiment that I have heard many times from people trying to Monday morning quarterback police interactions. While the idea of an emotionless automaton handling enforcement of the law sounds like a great way to eliminate any abuse and corruption complaints leveled at law enforcement officers nowadays, many people don't fully think this through. If law enforcement officers were actually like this, no one would get let off with a warning instead of a ticket. No one would be shown leniency in terms of correcting a problem without resorting to locking them up, and no one could even jaywalk without receiving a ticket or jail time. Surprisingly, even Michael Wood Jr. is of the same mindset on this, although he takes the opposite action to the extreme.
Is that something that you thought about before you became a cop, or is it something you cultivated while you were a cop?
I can't say for sure, but it seems like I actually think that was the wrong way to think. But if you analyze it and you're at that time, you think, well, how am I not going to be biased? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be biased by separating myself from the situation and kind of acting as autonomous.
Right.
But I think that also made me blind, because if I was being blind to racism, then I was being blind to when we were doing it. You know, even if I wasn't doing it, I wasn't seeing it when it occurred either, because I was literally blinding myself to it.
So you're saying that if you were blind to racism against you, then you were also blind to cops that were committing racism?
No, so if I looked at it as whether I was talking to somebody of Latino descent, of black, whatever, male, female, I looked at them just as equally, regardless. So if you do that, then you don't see that you're disproportionately enforcing things against somebody, because I'm literally not trying to see that.
So that's interesting. So by trying to treat everyone as equal, you weren't taking account of how many black people you were dealing with, how many Latinos you were dealing with, how many people of color, how many minorities. Is that a fair assessment?
It is fair to the extent that I'll admit that when I was in the Eastern District, I would intentionally lock white people up so that I could make sure my numbers weren't like my squad. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, look, they look up 95% African Americans. I didn't want to see that. I wanted to see some kind of balance. So I was like aware that, hey, we're locking too many black people up. But I don't think it just didn't compute at the time. It takes time for it to settle in.
So what about those poor white people that you locked up on purpose?
I got nothing.
Point 5. Blind to racism. Michael Wood Jr., in this clip, is trying to convince you and me that arresting people when you are either called to a complaint or witnessed a crime yourself is racist. Since most of the people getting arrested were black, obviously there was a problem with his perceptions at the time, based on the fact that he never arrested people that weren't guilty. So why were black people so overrepresented committing crimes? It couldn't be the fact that they were committing more crime, disproportionately more than their percentage of the population. That would be feeding into racism, and that is bad. So, once you establish racism as bad, the worst actually, then you understand what you have to do. You intentionally arrest more people of other cultural groups to even the numbers, especially white people. But this isn't racism, because you're actually making sure that everyone is represented equally in arrest numbers, even though you were specifically targeting a group of people based on belonging to a certain culture. But I can't stress enough how this is definitely not racism, since everyone is equal now. Okay, without the sarcasm, Want to know how to spot a group of people in charge? It's really easy and makes a lot of sense too. Simply look for the group of people you can't make fun of. A fine example of this is the grim faces and serious tones when talking about black incarceration rates. Then we're all giggles and glee when discussing literal racism against white people by locking them up more to make just the perception of racism go away. Pretty telling moment there, if you ask me.
Were they guilty at least?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
I never locked up anybody who wasn't guilty.
Well, that's good. But you experienced a lot of shit. I mean, some of the things that I read, okay, here's one. Punting a handcuffed face-down suspect in the face after a foot chase. Pissing and shitting inside suspects' homes during raids, on their beds and clothes. Jacking up and illegally searching thousands of people with no legal justification. This is crazy, man. This is crazy stuff.
Well, when you're doing it, it's just what police do. You know it. You've seen it on TV. You've seen it driving by. You've seen a corner full of black guys with the cops searching them. You've seen it. And when they're going into those pockets, you can't go into those pockets. You simply can't. But we do.
You're not allowed to.
Right.
It's illegal.
You have no way of doing it unless you're getting a frisk where you can justify plain field. But that's extremely rare. I mean.
Point 6. Extremely rare. No, the use of plain field doctrine, Minnesota versus Dickerson, 1993, is extremely fucking common. Just think of how often a cop in a high crime area would see someone doing something suspicious. Maybe standing still on a street corner for way too long, or walking down the middle of the street for no apparent reason when sidewalks are provided. Stuff like that. So when the cop approaches to interview the guy or girl, the first thing the cop does is pat them down to make sure he or she isn't talking to someone with an illegal revolver in their waistband. In the process of the pat down, the cop feels something like a plastic baggie full of what feels like nuggets of something solid but lightweight. Feeling something like that in an area where marijuana dealers are common would give the cop enough reason to ask the person what's in the baggie. If the answer is given with a sudden increase in heartbeat, as seen in the big artery in the neck, sudden increase in breath rate, or any other indication someone is extremely nervous or looking to run, or sometimes a plain admission that the baggie has weed in it, you now have enough reasonable suspicion to place that person in handcuffs, pull out the item in question, and inspect it yourself. If it's weed, you got an arrest. If not, you interview further to find out why they were so nervous, because you might be missing something else on their person. If it's nothing but a nervous person, and what you felt wasn't illegal, then they are free to go. Just think how many times a day that could happen, then double it.
That's a specific set of circumstances under a Terry stop, and that's nothing that
What's
you see.
a Terry stop?
So Terry versus Ohio was a case law that established, I could be slightly off in the particulars, but if somebody was displaying the characteristics of an armed person and you had suspicion or a hunch that criminal activity was afoot, you could stop that person and conduct a frisk of the outer garments. So
Outer garments.
Right. So just a pat down, essentially.
So does that outer garments mean a jacket?
Right, a jacket. So if you had, if like you thought they had a weapon on their hip, you could pull back the jacket and kind of pat it down. But it seems as the law is written, you'd have to even like squish it, and it's just what you can touch from the outside.
So if you patted the outside of the jacket and felt a gun that was in his waist, then you could arrest him or take that gun.
Right, you're perfectly fine.
But you can't dig in his pockets and look for crack.
Right. Well, you can if you have that's plain field doctrine. So if through my expertise, I can tell that is packaging that is consistent with narcotics that are distributed in the area, and I can justify that, then I can go and retrieve those narcotics. That's an extremely, I mean, if you can just think about that, how do I really know that bag in your pocket is marijuana, not oregano? I'm not sure if that should be legally justified or not.
Point 7. Plain field doctrine. Since most people aren't familiar with the U.S. Supreme Court case of Minnesota versus Dickerson, which is what Michael Wood Jr. is referring to, let me give you a very brief idea of what it is and how it influences interactions between law enforcement officers and civilians. Minnesota versus Dickerson, 1993, deals with using the sense of touch to locate and identify contraband. This case law is considered to be an extension of Terry versus Ohio, 1968, which is a case law for a Terry stop, or stop and frisk. A Terry stop is when a cop detains someone, preventing them from leaving, but not yet an arrest, due to a suspicion that this person has committed, is committing, or will commit a crime in the very near future. The cop then pats down that person to make sure there are no weapons on that person that could allow that person to easily injure or kill the cop. Minnesota versus Dickerson, plain field doctrine, comes into play during that pat down if the cop feels something they believe might be contraband, illegal drugs, paraphernalia, etc., and can identify as contraband through touch alone. So, after having said all of that, Mr. Wood's blanket statement of, and when they're going into those pockets, you can't go into those pockets, because you simply can't, but we do, is extremely misleading to the point of being a bald-faced lie. No cop with more than a single day out of training will, hopefully, allow himself to remove something from someone's pockets without legal justification or verbal, and sometimes written, permission backing them up. Because if you do, your case could get thrown out at the very least, and at the worst, you could face 5 to 15 years of jail time for a civil rights violation. And that is federal time in a federal penitentiary, day for day, with no hope of getting out early for good behavior. If you've stuck to this explanation so far, now maybe you can understand how plain feel might be applied several times a day while interacting with people on the street, instead of Mr. Wood's wishful thinking of being extremely rare. The only explanation I can come up with as to why Mr. Wood is trying to make being a cop so carefree in terms of oversight is because if you don't know cops operate on a strict set of rules and procedure, then you are left with the assumption that they can do whatever they want, and nobody likes that idea. Mr. Wood wants you to believe this though, which makes it easier to justify his continued popularity and necessity. What a dirtbag. Poop. Poopity poop. Big poop. The other side of stupid.